Hey everyone, welcome back to The Phoenix's Tale. I am your host Gabe. This week we are talking about chapter 17, The Heir of Slytherin. So let's get into a brief recap. So Harry left Ron and Lockhart behind because Lockhart tried to erase their memories with Ron's broken wand and basically made the antechamber collapse. And Harry's the only one that can access the chamber at this point. So he finds Ginny in the main chamber, unconscious. But he also finds somebody else there. A 16-year-old Tom Riddle. The longer Harry and Tom talk, the stronger Tom seems to become, while Ginny seems to slowly be fading away. At one point, Tom admits to Harry that Tom, is actually, dun dun dun, Lord Voldemort. Voldemort calls the basilisk, and Harry, in desperation, calls for help. And Fawkes shows up with the sorting hat, and after a bit of hide and seek, between Harry and the basilisk, Fawkes blinds the basilisk by clawing its eyes out, and Harry, having retrieved a sword from the sorting hat, finishes off the basilisk. Harry was injured in the process, but Fawkes heals him through Phoenix Tears. Phoenix Tears have healing powers. And in the end, Harry stabs the diary with a basilisk fang, and the diary dies. That's how it's described in the book. Ginny regains consciousness, explains to Harry that she was the one who killed the roosters, let the basilisks out, and painted the messages on the wall. And so she and Harry head back to the antechamber where Lockhart and Ron is. And Fawkes, because he's a phoenix and he's got magical powers, manages to carry everybody back up into Moaning Myrtle's bathroom and leads the party to Professor McGonagall's office. Because I am behind, I have been talking about that the last couple episodes, that my mental health got really out of whack, and I have been putting a lot of work into resting, healing, things like that. We're going to go ahead and do the January birthdays, because we have a couple January birthdays that we need to celebrate. So, back on January 9th, we had Severus Snape. Professor Lockhart himself on January 26th, and on January 30th, we have Lily Evans Potter. So this week, I thought I would dive into the topic of cognitive dissonance. And this is a concept that we haven't discussed yet. And given the result of Lockhart's backfiring skill, I feel it's a good one to look at before we close out this book. So there's going to be a lot more psychology as opposed to personal experiences this episode. But, that's okay. I like the variety. Cognitive dissonance is a psychological concept that refers to the mental discomfort or unease a person experiences when they hold two or more conflicting beliefs, attitudes, or values, or when their behavior conflicts with those beliefs. This discomfort motivates the individual to reduce the inconsistency, often by changing their thoughts, beliefs, or behaviors, or by rationalizing or justifying them to restore a sense of internal harmony. For example, a person who knows smoking is harmful but continues to smoke may experience cognitive dissonance and try to resolve it by downplaying the risks or convincing themselves that they can quit any time. That's a very easy example to understand cognitive dissonance. So, in essence, cognitive dissonance highlights the drive for psychological consistency and the strategies that people use to manage conflicting cognitions to reduce emotional distress. This theory, first introduced by Leon Festinger in the 1950s, is fundamental to understanding how people cope with conflicting information or behavior in everyday life and in complex situations. Gilderoy Lockhart, since we're talking about him, is a classic example of cognitive dissonance in action. Throughout the book, we have seen Lockhart portray himself as a confident, accomplished wizard and hero. However, the reality is quite opposite, as we learned last week. He has fabricated his achievements, stolen other people's stories, and lacks true magical competence. In fact, I believe those memory charms are the only thing he was ever really good at. We saw that back in the Rogue Bludger chapter, where Dobby sends the Bludger after Harry to try to get him to go home, because Hogwarts is dangerous for Harry Potter. And Lockhart tries to mend Harry's broken arm and ends up removing the bones from his entire arm. Okay. Lockhart's a bit of a putz. I'm just going to say that. This significant discrepancy between his self-presentation and reality creates cognitive dissonance. So Lockhart likely experiences internal psychological discomfort from this conflict. We saw that in the last chapter. I didn't talk about it much in the recap, but there was a part when Harry and Ron were hiding in the cupboard in the staff room, and McGonagall's explaining to all the other teachers that a student has been taken into the chamber. And Lockhart shows up late, and, McGonagall and Snape are all against it. Well, didn't you say that you could have solved this problem, and you know everything that's going on, and you know where the chamber is, and blah, blah, blah? And okay, well, then Gilderoy will let you get to it. So he leaves, and when Ron and Harry go to talk to him, thinking that he's preparing to go into the Chamber of Secrets, he's really packing up and leaving town. Okay. A lot of psychological discomfort on the part of Gilderoy Lockhart is my point here. So, to reduce his dissonance, he maintains an inflated self-image and continues to deceive others and himself, rather than confronting the truth of his inadequacies. His constant need for admiration and fear of exposure drive him to fabricate stories and manipulate perceptions to uphold his false persona. And this rationalization helps him avoid the distress that would come from admitting his failures or incompetence. At no point, even when he's explaining to Ron and Harry that, nobody would have read the story, read his books, if they thought that people thought that he did not do those things. And then he starts talking about, how ugly, this one person was, whoever banished the Banded Banshee, or, the vampire or whatever, they would have looked dreadful on the cover of the books. And yeah, Lockhart's a piece of work, let me tell you. Furthermore, Lockhart's cognitive dissonance manifests in his reactions when challenged or exposed. He resorts to magical memory charms to erase others' memories, an extreme attempt to avoid having to face the contradictions in his identity. His behavior illustrates the lengths people may go to reduce dissonance, including denial, distortion, and manipulation of facts. In summary, Lockhart embodies cognitive dissonance as his public confidence and portrayed identity sharply conflict with his true capabilities, which are minimal, and his extreme lack of self-awareness. His coping mechanisms to manage the dissonance include deception, self-aggrandizement, and avoidance of reality, all driven by the need to maintain psychological consistency and his own self-esteem. However, we know that Ron and Harry clued into Lockhart's true nature from the very beginning, and it carried on throughout the entire book. So, let's kind of dive into those. The first one, the initial meeting. Right from his grand entrance at Flourish and Blots, Lockhart makes a show of himself, boasting about his supposed heroic exploits. His exaggerated storytelling and inflated ego immediately set off alarms for Harry and Ron, who sense his claims are too good to be true. For example, Lockhart's relentless self-promotion is seen throughout the book, especially when he signs books and brags to his students. Lockhart's teaching methods. There's another area. In class, his inability to effectively teach proper defensive spells, fumbling simple demonstrations, and lack of real practical knowledge frustrate Harry and Ron, signaling his incompetence. In fact, back in Chapter 9, during the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, we remember that Lockhart releases the Cornish Pixies to demonstrate spellcasting, and nothing he did worked. And the Cornish Pixies create chaos, attacking students and Lockhart himself, showing his inability to control even a small magical creature. Harry and Ron observe his failure to manage the situation and realize Lockhart's incompetence. And this is a key moment where his facade cracks publicly, because he just did that in front of a whole classroom of, I don't know how many students. A lot of students. I've never really been quite clear on the class sizes of Hogwarts, but I believe Defense Against the Dark Arts was just the Gryffindors in the book. The dueling club incident. Excuse me. When the dueling club is formed and Lockhart volunteers to teach defensive magic, Harry and Ron notice his reliance on charm and ego rather than skill and substance. Not to mention Lockhart dropping his wand when showing Harry a spell just before Harry and Malfoy face off. All of his private advice for Harry. Lockhart singles Harry out for special treatment and offers him advice several times, often giving superficial or inappropriate guidance. For example, when Harry struggles with the flying lesson aftermath, I'm looking at my notes here, people. Sorry. For instance, when Harry struggles with the flying lesson aftermath, Lockhart offers platitudes rather than practical help. I don't know what the flying lesson has to do with that. My apologies for that. But another example is when Lockhart advises Harry on confronting danger, but his advice usually reveals a lack of real experience or understanding. And it's those private moments that expose Lockhart's lack of genuine mentorship and further raise Harry's suspicions. The disastrous attempt to protect the castle. When Ron and Harry accompany Lockhart to the Chamber of Secrets entrance, Lockhart panics and attempts to escape, which demonstrates his cowardice and his untruthfulness. You know, all the teachers knew. That's why they got rid of him from the staff room in the last chapter. He tries to abandon the boys when they're in the midst of danger, and revealing that his bravado is also all a sham. You know, he's not really brave. He was willing to sacrifice Ron and Harry, two 12-year-old kids. And let's also not forget Lockhart's demeanor in the staff room where Harry and Ron are hiding and overhear that Ginny has been taken into the chamber. I just mentioned that. So, and then finally, we got the memory charm backfiring on him. Lockhart's ultimate exposure as a fraud comes when his spell to erase Harry and Ron's memories backfires wiping his own memory instead. This comedic disaster confirms to Harry and Ron that Lockhart lacks the skill and competence that he claims. And he's also quite unconcerned about Ginny's eventual death if she were to have been left down there, had Lockhart's plan worked. So it's throughout those moments where Harry and Ron's skepticism grows from amused disbelief at Flourish and Blots to firm recognition of Lockhart as a charlatan, showing their critical thinking and growing maturity in assessing those around them, which, kids know, man. I'm just saying. So let's look at some of the things you can do to help yourself if you recognize this in yourself and are having difficulty getting proper therapy at the moment, which is key to my social media and to this podcast. So some ways you can help with your own cognitive dissonance moments. Self-reflection and journaling. Writing down conflicting thoughts and feelings can help clarify the nature of the dissonance and start promoting some self-awareness. Mindfulness practices. Engaging in mindfulness, meditation, or breathing exercises helps ground your emotions. It helps reduce stress and increase tolerance for uncomfortable feelings without impulsive reactions. Reality testing. I thought this was an interesting one. Challenge irrational or conflicting beliefs by seeking evidence and questioning automatic assumptions to reduce distortion and denial. Small behavior changes. This is a key one. Take incremental steps to align behaviors with your core values, even if it's imperfect, even if it's messy, in order to reduce internal conflict and build self-trust. Social support. Talk with trusted friends or support groups or a therapist no, sorry. I just said this is for those who are having a hard time accessing therapy. So trusted friends or support groups can provide perspective, encouragement, and decrease feelings of isolation. Cognitive restructuring, using positive affirmations and reframing techniques to counter negative self-talk and justify healthier thinking patterns. This one is essentially the heart of looking for proof that my father was wrong about me when I began at the age of 21, almost 22 years old, to doubt his assertions about me. That I was lazy, I was stupid, I was worthless, I suck at everything that I do, blah, 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 blah. That's basically what I ended up doing, is I started looking at my life and looking at it in terms of, if someone else were telling my story as their own, not in a stolen identity kind of way, but in a, this is how they really lived it. Asking, and then, doing that flip-flop on that, and then asking myself, what would it take for me to look at somebody and think, wow, you're badass? What would it take for me to prove to myself, what do I have going on in my life at this point, to prove to myself that I'm not stupid, despite everything that my father ever said? That's essentially what I was doing, looking for that proof for myself, was cognitive restructuring. Anyway, onward. Set manageable goals. Break down larger goals into smaller, achievable actions that promote a sense of progress and empowerment. Having nothing to do with cognitive dissonance, this is what I have been doing with myself to start gaining some forward momentum again over the last couple months, with my mental health being what it was and kind of being triggered almost. So set those manageable goals. Avoidance of harmful realizations. Recognize and resist excuses or justifications that perpetuate dissonance and unhealthy behavior cycles. That's difficult for a lot of us because so many people, and again, we'll go back to my father. Why did you do that? Why did you say that? Why did you think that? Why did you... And anytime I try to explain, I was just making excuses. So that one is probably going to be more difficult for a lot of us. In recognizing, okay, am I giving you a logical train of thought how I went from A to B to, oh shit, this is how I got to where I failed that class, or this is where I got to why I did this and this item broke, or, whatever from my childhood. As somebody who's autistic, that's a normal process. It's like, well, you asked how I got to this. I'm not making an excuse. I am explaining to you how this happened. So it's very difficult for me to recognize, because of that outward messaging and the internal understanding of, okay, well, how did this happen? Well, I was doing this, and then I got up and I went over here and did that. And then when I was doing this, the cat got in the way and I tripped and I knocked this over and it broke. I'm just making up an example. Stop making excuses. But you literally just asked how this happened. I told you how it happened. It's very difficult for me with that mixed messaging to know, am I really making excuses or justifications, or am I seeing, oh, okay, that's how I got into trouble with this, or that's how I got into trouble with that. If you get my meaning. That one has been a bit more difficult for me, and it might be a bit difficult for a lot of you for the same reasons. Self-compassion. Practice kindness towards yourself during periods of struggle to reduce shame and increase motivation for change. Nobody's perfect. Everybody messes up something once in a while. I can fix it. I'm willing to fix it. There's another thing. I show myself compassion. It's just, even if it's just like, I guess it's just one of those days. Okay, so I'm going to have a day where I'm a klutz, or I'm going to have a day where, my mind is elsewhere and I'm not thinking in the present moment, whatever it is. Anymore, I do my best to show myself compassion in those moments. And then, of course, educational resources, reading books, or access credible online resources about cognitive dissonance and related psychological concepts to better understand your own experience. So, implementing these methods can provide relief and structure while preparing for formal therapy, and promoting emotional resilience and readiness for deeper healing work. So, here's a good way to think about this. Any of, the actual psychology that I find, and as always, I give you my references in the show notes if you, like me, are a nerd like that. This is basically ways that I have found to help myself. This is what the research says that you can do to help yourself. But I don't want any of you out there ever to think that this can replace therapy. Absolutely not. As somebody who does have that bachelor's degree in psychology and has had my own incredible journey with all of this, basically having to find a way to help myself. Think of it as prep for therapy. It's like I know I'll get into therapy eventually. The money will be there. I'll get different insurance. There'll finally be an opening at a therapist's office somewhere. Whatever your block is with accessing therapy right now, think of all of these things, including everything we talked about today, as, just kind of the prep work. If that makes any sense. I hope it does. And because I'm getting tired, we're going to wrap things up for this episode. So next week, we are finally finishing Chamber of Secrets. A couple episodes back, we talked about why this is not my favorite. So we will be going through chapter 18, Dobby's Reward. And until then, because this was the first January episode, I want to wish everybody a belated Happy New Year, and that I hope 2026 is going to be an amazing one for you, even though as I'm recording this, it is mid-February. So we're only a month and a half in, so there's plenty of 2026, and I hope it's an amazing one for you. And I will see you next week as we wrap up Chamber of Secrets. See you then.